Hello, my name is Isabel Cayetano, and I will be discussing cases and laws that shaped bilingual education. Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954. So, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. Oliver Brown was the father of Linda Brown, a third grade student. So, Linda Brown was actually denied acceptance into an all white school close to her home, so she had to travel miles in order to go to a segregated school. So, this is where the conflict begins. Segregation, an action or state of setting someone or something apart from other people or things or being set apart. So Linda Brown was essentially discriminated because she wasn't allowed, just because of the color of her skin, she wasn't allowed to attend a school closer to her. So she had to travel farther in order to be able to attend school. So the outcome of this case, the court ruled that any laws created to separate students based on race is unconstitutional. This case made it clear that states are responsible for providing students with equal education opportunities. An end was put to the separate but equal ruling under the Presley versus Ferguson case, which legalized segregation. It also impacted students of all ethnicities, which are African American, Native American, Asian, and Hispanic. Usually you hear this case impacts African Americans, but it was kind of cool seeing how this case kind of drafted legislate. This case was like kind of used in a way to also prove other cases. So now the next case is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So in 1963, President John F. Kennedy addressed the nation, urging the nation to take action toward guaranteeing every American equal treatment. It was proposed to Congress. The legislation would address voting rights, public accommodation, and school desegregation. So after his assassination, this bill came to be proposed as the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So even though John F. Kennedy did kind of pave the way for LBJ to sign this legislation, Kennedy did not sign it. The person who actually signed it was Lyndon B. Johnson. He signed it on June 6, 1964, and it was approved by the House on July 2nd, 1964. So it took about a month. The act outlawed segregation in theaters, restaurants, hotels. Back in the day, people of color couldn't attend certain theaters or certain restaurants or certain hotels. So it also banned discriminatory practices of employment. So let's say you wanted to work at a certain restaurant and it was owned by a white owner. So you couldn't be turned back just because of the color of your skin. They were still obligated to interview you. So this also ended segregation in public places, school desegregation, so in public schools, swimming pool, and libraries, and public accommodations. So this was really interesting just because you see how like we're kind of shifting now towards like equality for all. So now we're going to go to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. This law represented a major new community by the federal government to quality and equality in educating our young people. So basically this act was created so everybody could have an equal education. And be provided with the same assistance, even though some were from more low resources. So in order to do that, they provided federal grants for textbooks and library books because some schools couldn't afford to buy their own books or their own library books. There was a creation of special education centers and scholarships for low-income college students. So this kind of also like bridged the gap between the low income and the people who did those higher income districts. And it also improved the quality of elementary and second education. The next one is the Bilingual Education Act of 1968, the first official federal recognition of needs to students with limited speaking ability, so LESA. Senator Ralph Yarabog of Texas proposed this bill to provide assistance for school districts who established programs for LESA students. So back in the day, there wasn't really any program set in stone for students who were limited in speaking English. So this kind of paved a way for many more legislations to come. And we'll talk about that in the next column. So it recommended students to be taught through their native language. So in this case, or down south, where mostly people here speak Spanish. And so programs were also designed to give Spanish-speaking students an appreciation of ancestral language and culture. So not only were they learning about how to speak English, they were also learning about their culture and their cultural background. And so this led to the introduction of 37 other bills. These bills are now Title 42 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It states that students have special education needs. So it means that these students, like, you can't just kind of give them the same curriculum as other students. They have a special curriculum that's catered to them to help them learn English. An interest of equal educational opportunity. So these kids didn't blessed kids did not really have the same opportunities as other students. They kind of had to either sink or swim, as we will discuss in the next case. And so this created programs for those students. And so another thing that was recommended is that the bilingual program that addresses these needs should be federally funded. So these programs should be funded by the government, due to them being new programs, and also like lots of immigrant families come from low resources. So our next one is the Lau versus Nichols, 1974. So in the city of San Francisco, Chinese American students were placed in general education classrooms. So in this case, the student doesn't understand the English language, so they're essentially left to either sink or swim. So the students either fail out, or they just kind of sit in there and not do anything because they don't understand the language. So the district argued that SAS received equal treatment, but they didn't. As you can tell, like, if you're left to either sink or swim, that's not really equal treatment because they're not providing you with more opportunity to learn. So, Justice William Douglas stated, under these state-imposed standards, there is no equality of treatment merely by providing students with the same facilities, textbook, teachers, curriculum. For students who do not understand English are effectively foreclosed from any meaningful education. We know that those who do not understand English are certain to find their classroom experience wholly incomprehensible and in no way meaningful. So in this case, like, they didn't really understand what they were being taught because they didn't know the language. So this case actually impacted and created the Lau remedies. So it required districts to implement bilingual education programs. So here we finally have a requirement for districts who have ELL students to implement these programs. So these are the following things that were implemented. It identified and evaluated national origin minority students, so identified those students who were in need of extra assistance. It also determined appropriate instructional treatment, so it provides extra treatments for students who need to learn the English language. And it decided that LEPs were ready for it decided when LEPs are ready for a general education classroom. So they kind of were started to create tests in order to know if an LEP student was ready to go into a general ed classroom. So teachers meeting professional standards for language minorities, so making sure that teachers are also being held accountable by meeting those state standards through the Lau remedies. So these remedies essentially provided students special English as a second language instruction, as well as academic instructions in the student's proficient language. So let's say I'm a bilingual student and I know Spanish. So I'm being taught in my native language, which is Spanish, and I'm also receiving extra instruction in English. The next court case is So the Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974, the Lau remedies essentially crafted this legislation. The act required states and schools districts to provide equal education opportunities for students who are learning English. This act prohibits discrimination against faculty, staff, students, including racial segregation, and students that requires school districts to take action to overcome barriers to the students' equal participation. So this act kind of protects students from being discriminated, and as we can see, a court case that kind of helped shape the way, and we kind of see like the backdrop about it, is Brown versus Board of Education, when we were separate but we weren't equal. So Section 1703F states, no state shall deny educational opportunities to an individual on account of his or her race, color, sex, or national origin. F, by failure of the and this also states that it is the educational agency to take appropriate actions if these are being violated, to overcome language barriers, that implement equal participation by its students and its instructional programs. So, Race to the Top from 2009 and 2015 was a legislation that provided 4 billion in competitive grants. So this legislation was passed in order to kind of help low achieving schools have higher achieving grades. So states had to simply make advanced reforms around the 4 areas listed to the right. So first, schools had to adopt standards and assessments that helped students prepare to succeed in college and in the workplace. So programs like these are called AVID. Now that is what they use here in Lubbock. And so build data that can measure the students' growth and success, provide information on how teachers can improve instruction. So one thing that actually is cool that I like about Lubbock and seeing in my placement is that I am able to see students complete this program called iStation. And so essentially after each iStation, this teacher kind of gets a feel if the student accomplished their goal that was kind of set for them, and they kind of see like the growth in the student, and they're also able to provide these numbers and information to parents whenever they have parent-teacher conferences. Point number 3 is recruiting, developing, rewarding, and retaining effective teachers and principals. So one thing that like can happen to teachers is getting bonuses, kind of providing like special lunches for teachers to kind of want teachers to be teaching where they're at, even though it kind of wanting to be the face of lifting up the school from the ground. Point number 4 was turn around lowest achieving scores, as stated in the beginning. This was kind of to help those schools who were lacking those achieving scores to be up there. This is kind of like helps them, kind of motivated them, and also kind of required them to do it. So Castaneda versus Pickard, so the plaintiffs charged Raymondville Independent School District for failing to address the needs of an English language learner. So the needs were addressed through the Equal Education Opportunities Act. So the court did not find Raymondville responsible. This case created 3 prolonged tests that determined if schools were taking appropriate action. So as you can see, they weren't really receiving any instruction. So these tests were created in order to see if they kind of like either needed to get started on a program or somebody needed to implement the program. So the test was based on sound educational theory. The second point was implement effectively with sufficient resources and personnel. And the third one was evaluate to determine whether they are effective in helping students overcome language barriers. So the third one, it applies to teachers. So kind of to see if the teachers are actually able to teach these students in their native language. So this case is used to determine the adequacy of English language learner program. I apologize. I have a retainer and it's not fun. So Every Child Succeeds Act 2015 to now. So this act was signed by President Obama on December 10, 2015. So this legislation also provided equal opportunities for every student. The benefits of this legislation is that with this legislation, we did have higher graduation rates, and we also had lower graduation rates, and we also had higher college bound. So that meant that more students were going into college more after high school. The highlights of this case is that it required all students to be taught with high academic standards, and the standards will prepare them for success in college and career. So this is why we kind of have more students now going to colleges, because they're more academically prepared. The second point is upholds critical protections for Americans, disadvantaged, and high needs of students. So there was protections against those with disabilities and who kind of didn't have the same advantage of going to college. It provided them with equal opportunities. It ensures that vital information is provided to educators, families, students, and communities. So this also ensures that parents are well informed on what's going on with their child's education, and it also is well informed that the students are being taught to that standard. So this is done, how we kind of prove our way is that this is done through school-wide assessments, and it helps support and grow local innovations and evidence-based and place-based interventions developed by local leaders and educators, and an increased access to quality preschool programs. I didn't know that you had to pay for preschool until I actually got to Lubbock, so it's kind of interesting. So thank you for attending my presentation. Below are the sources listed that I used to create this presentation. I really hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.